Some people just can't let it go, huh? The voice cut through the low diner hum like a bottle breaking on concrete. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. At 9:17 a.m., the regular rhythm of Sunday morning at Jordan's Diner was already set in motion. Eggs sizzling in the back, silverware clinking, locals half awake over their second coffees. But that voice pulled the energy sideways. He'd only just made it past the coffee counter. Tray in both hands, step by step, same routine he'd followed every Sunday morning for the past 12 years. Samuel Webb, former Marine, 79 and walking proof that some men don't let go of their habits, no matter how hard they shake loose. The guys in the booth didn't know his name, and they didn't care. They wore matching tournament shirts, bass fishing logos stretched over bellies that hadn't seen morning PT in decades. Weekend tourists full of beer and early bravado. One of them leaned over his plate and made it loud enough for the whole front half of the diner to hear. Jesus, how long's it going to take him to get to that booth? Somebody start a clock. They laughed. Not the sharp bark of real amusement. This was the sticky, greasy kind of laughter that likes being overheard. 2 booths away, someone stiffened but didn't turn. A waitress hesitated at the kitchen door, coffee pot hovering, pretending she hadn't caught it. The manager, buried in orders, missed the tone altogether. And Sam Webb, he kept moving forward. The table by the window waited for him like it always had, same as the coffee in the cup he carried. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, no butter. It never changed. Neither did the limp, which hadn't softened since '73. Most didn't notice it anymore. Those who did didn't ask. He reached the booth just as the laughter faded into a new round of clinking forks. A man 3 tables back mumbled something about fake vets and free coffee and got a muted chuckle from one of the tournament guys. The insult floated just high enough to land in the ears of everyone nearby, then sank quietly, no ripple. Sam didn't flinch. He didn't turn around. He just started his usual routine, setting down the tray, keeping the cup steady, adjusting the silverware. That's when the fork slipped. It bounced once off the tray and landed under the table. Someone at the counter let out a quick snort. Bet he practiced that move just to guilt the staff into helping. No one moved. Not one customer. Not a single employee. Sam didn't ask for help. He hadn't asked 12 years ago when he first walked through the door, and he wasn't starting now. In the corner, a man in uniform, clean, pressed, high-collared, watched it unfold. He hadn't touched his coffee. He wasn't there to eat. He hadn't looked away once. But no one saw him yet. All attention was still loosely focused on the man with the dropped fork. The jokes had started mean but harmless, or at least that's what they told themselves. Banter, locker room talk, nothing personal. They didn't know his story. They didn't care. He was old, slow, and easy to mock, a Sunday morning target in a military cap. Sam bent slowly toward the fork. His hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but they were his. The booth was his. The ritual was his. What came next? The words, the sneers, the judgment, none of that belonged to him. He had nothing to do with it, but it came anyway. One of the men near the back tried a louder jab, emboldened by the silence. I'd offer to help, but I left my cosplay badge at home. More laughter. Not everyone joined. Not this time. Some faces dropped. A few stared harder at their eggs. The waitress near the counter still hadn't moved. Her name was Carla, and she'd served him more times than she could count. But that moment, that pause, it held. Then she stepped forward, quietly, picked up the fork, placed it back on the tray, and walked off without a word. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't permission. It was something closer to recognition. Sam didn't look up. He finished setting the table, adjusted the toast, checked the coffee level, folded the napkin once, then he started eating. The booth behind him still chuckled. Not as loud, not as frequent. One of the men nudged another, said something about guys like that never saw a day in the field. Another replied, my cousin's in the Corps. They don't limp like that. Nobody responded. Samuel Webb continued with his meal like it was just another Sunday, which for him it was. But in the back, someone had already stood. Someone had already decided that this wasn't going to end like every other Sunday. The shift had started. Quiet, steady, deliberate. Just like Sam, he always arrived at 9:15, not 9:14, not 9:16. 12 years of Sunday mornings had burned it into the rhythm of the place, even if most people never noticed. But Carla did. The cook in the back did. Hank, the owner, knew too, even if he barely looked up anymore. You could set your watch to Samuel Webb's footsteps, slow as they were. And there he was, this morning like every other. Same pressed slacks, same plain button down, same worn down cane propped by the counter while he fetched his own tray. Not because he had to, but because he refused not to. He could have asked. He could have let Carla bring the food. But men like Sam didn't work that way. Some things you didn't let go, no matter how many bones ached. He always sat at the same booth, by the window, third from the left, facing the street. The sunlight hit it by mid-morning, just enough to warm the table. No one ever took it, not because it was reserved, not officially, but because people knew. Some unwritten rules don't need signs. Carla always had his order ready. Black coffee, 2 eggs, over easy. Wheat toast, dry, never changed. Didn't need to. Sam would nod once when he arrived. That was enough. She never asked if he wanted something different. He never did. But this morning had already started wrong. The tourists in the fishing shirts were new. Not regulars. Loud, careless with their jokes, laughing at things that weren't funny. Sam hadn't said a word to them. He never said a word to anyone he didn't have to. He didn't sit alone out of pride. Not exactly. More like habit. Years of service had carved independence into his bones. Carry your weight. Don't complain. Show up on time. Know your role. He didn't think of himself as noble. He thought of himself as accountable. So he bussed his own table, picked up his own napkin, set his tray down with careful precision, moving with the deliberate, practiced steps of someone who once had to make every movement count. When the fork slipped from his tray, clattered to the floor, he didn't react. He measured. That's what he did with everything now. Measured energy, measured risk, measured pain. And when no one moved, when the laughter behind him started again, when that voice tossed another cheap line about fake vets and cosplay, he didn't acknowledge any of it. Because what would be the point? The world had changed around him. The men he served with were either buried or limping. The medals meant less outside their boxes. The stories were fading from the generation after his. That was fine. He didn't come to be recognized. He came because the booth was his, because Sunday was his. The new insults were louder now, fueled by beer and the confidence of an audience. You believe this guy? Probably never even left the country. My cousin's a real Marine. He doesn't milk it like that. Sam cut into his eggs slowly, careful not to spill the yolk. The knife shook a little. Not much. He steadied it, kept eating. Behind him, Carla stood frozen, coffee pot still tilted toward a half-full mug. She'd heard it. So had the customer at table 6, the one who always brought crossword puzzles and never tipped. A kid near the counter had gone quiet mid-bite. The man reading the paper hadn't turned a page in 2 minutes. No one said anything. The diner's noise returned in small waves, clinks, murmurs, chairs sliding. But under it, the tension held, thick and waiting. From the far back corner, still unnoticed, the man in the high-collared uniform stayed seated, his plate untouched, coffee untouched, a colonel's eagle on his chest, still as stone, watching. Colonel Gordon Maddox hadn't planned on stopping at Jordan's that morning. He'd been en route to D.C., late for a briefing he didn't care about. Something about policy updates, uniform revisions, committee feedback, bureaucracy and polished boots. But he'd stopped anyway. Something about the diner, about the smell of burnt toast and bad coffee had drawn him in. It reminded him of base mess halls, quiet camaraderie. And then he'd seen Sam. He hadn't known him, not personally, but he'd recognized the walk, the way Sam held his tray, the small but precise movements. You didn't get those from yoga or rehab. You got them from decades of muscle memory under stress. Gordon hadn't touched his coffee because he'd been watching since the moment Sam entered. The hecklers, the laughter, the dropped fork, it all unfolded like a slow fuse in a dry field. He didn't rise when the insults started. Not yet. He wasn't looking for a confrontation. But something in the silence around Sam's booth, in the way everyone else tried not to see, shifted the air, a sense that something real had just happened. When Sam picked up his toast again, Gordon's mind was already made up. He stood, not quickly, not dramatically, just with purpose. Not everyone noticed at first, but those who did stopped pretending. Colonel Gordon Maddox walked the length of the diner without speaking. No tapping of glass, no clearing of throat, no grand entrance. Just steady steps, polished shoes, uniform crisp enough to turn heads even before people registered what he was wearing. The guy who'd made the cosplay crack didn't notice until Maddox was halfway there. When he did, his face curled in that sloppy way of men who assume they still own the room. He leaned back in the booth, tilted his chin toward the approaching figure, and spat the line like it was a dare. "Hey, Colonel Sanders, you here to back him up? Or is that uniform just for show?" A few people laughed, the kind of laughs that trailed off halfway through. Carla flinched behind the counter. The crossword guy folded his paper. The boy at the counter didn't blink. Sam Webb kept eating. Colonel Maddox didn't acknowledge the heckler. He didn't look at the man or reply. Instead, he stopped at Sam's booth, bent down slowly, and picked up the fork still lying beneath the table. He placed it gently on the edge of Sam's tray. Then he took a step back. Not to the side, not to another seat, directly behind Sam's chair. There, in full view of every customer, he assumed a posture known intimately by every soldier who had ever stood for roll call. Attention, arms straight, hands flat, spine aligned. It wasn't dramatic, it was exact. And suddenly, no one spoke. Not a whisper, not a chair scrape, not even the kitchen bell. Time didn't freeze, it just listened. The scene didn't need narration, it spoke in silence. A man in uniform standing guard behind a fellow Marine. No plaque, no trumpet, just an old man eating eggs and a colonel standing behind him like a sentinel. At first, people weren't sure what to do. One waitress froze mid-pour. A customer stared into his coffee like it had answers. Carla put down the pot she was holding quietly and folded her hands behind the counter. In the booth near the kitchen, the man who'd started it all shifted, his beer bottle held loosely in his grip. He watched the colonel and blinked twice like he couldn't quite figure out if this was part of the joke or the punchline. But the colonel didn't flinch. For 30 seconds, the diner held its breath. No clatter of cutlery, no slurp of coffee, just a low kitchen fan and the distant murmur of a passing car outside. The kind of silence that makes people remember where they are and who they are. Sam looked up once, not at the colonel, but toward the window beside him, where the reflection caught a single line of Maddox's jaw and the insignia on his chest. That was enough. In that reflection, in that single glance, everything unsaid passed between them. Not thanks, recognition. From across the room, the insult-wielding tourist sat straighter, eyes darting between Sam, the colonel, and the now silent crowd. His fingers twitched once around the bottle before he set it down. The joke had turned cold. Behind the counter, Hank Jordan finally stepped into the room from the back hallway. He had seen everything from the small security monitor perched above the office door. He'd watched it from the moment the tray slipped and the laughter followed. And he'd let it unfold, waiting, as men sometimes do, to see what silence would teach. But now the lesson had arrived. Gordon Maddox reached into the breast pocket of his uniform and pulled out a clear plastic sleeve. Inside, a single faded photograph. He held it up high enough for the room to see. In the image, a young man in full combat gear, face streaked with mud and exhaustion, carried another Marine across dense jungle. The younger version of Maddox, unmistakably younger, his helmet askew, blood on one pant leg, slung over the shoulder of a soldier with a look of fierce focus. That soldier was Sam Webb. The silence deepened, not from fear, from understanding. Then Maddox spoke, not loudly, just enough to carry. "This man carried me out of a burning convoy outside Da Nang in 1972, he said, 3 miles through enemy territory with a bullet in his own leg." He lowered the photo slightly. "He's the reason I'm alive today, the reason I was able to have a family, the reason I wear this rank." No one moved. Sam still hadn't said a word. His hand rested near his coffee. His eyes were still on his plate. It wasn't modesty. It was memory, the kind you don't unpack at breakfast. The man at the booth tried to say something. His voice cracked. We didn't know," he managed. "Maddox didn't blink. You didn't ask." No heat, no judgment, just fact. He turned to Carla. "I'd like to cover Sergeant Webb's meal today." Then, addressing the whole staff, he added, "And I want everyone here to know, this booth, as far as the United States Marine Corps is concerned, belongs to him." From the back of the room, Hank stepped forward, his face unreadable. "I saw everything," he said, loud enough to reach the quiet corners. "And I'd like to ask Sergeant Webb something." Sam finally looked up. Hank nodded toward the booth. I'd like to name this table after you, officially. There was no ceremony, no big applause, just a man's name, a booth, and a diner that had seen what respect looked like when it showed up quietly, stood tall, and said nothing. Sam didn't answer right away. He just looked at Hank, then at the booth, then back to his plate. For a second, it was unclear whether he'd heard the request or maybe just decided to ignore it. But then his voice came, low and dry. No need for that, Hank. Simple. Flat. Like someone refusing to make a fuss at the DMV. But Hank didn't budge. He glanced once around the room, at the people still holding their breath, still watching from behind half-sipped mugs and untouched pancakes. There's every need, Hank said. No one clapped. No one toasted. The corner booth, the one where the laughter had started, was dead silent. The men sitting there weren't saying much anymore. The one who had made the cosplay comment kept his hands on the table, flat. One of the others looked down at his phone like it might save him. Maddox stayed where he was, still at attention behind Sam's chair, still holding the photo in one hand. He didn't need to speak again. He'd already said enough. Hank turned to the group in the corner. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. "Gentlemen," he said, "I think it's time you settled your bill." Nobody argued. The guy who'd been loudest, the one who started it all, stood up. Not quickly, not slowly. Just enough movement to signal that he'd accepted what was already true. He approached Sam's booth, steps uneven, like he'd forgotten how to walk casual. When he got there, he didn't look Maddox in the eye, didn't even glance at Hank. "Sir," he said to Sam, "we owe you an apology." Sam looked at him once. No smile, no anger, just a look. Then he nodded once. Nothing more. The man didn't wait for forgiveness. He turned, walked back to his booth, and pulled out his wallet. The other men followed. They paid. They left. As the door closed behind them, the noise inside the diner started to return, like someone had lifted a weight from the ceiling. A couple of customers resumed eating. A spoon clinked softly against a bowl. The boy at the counter looked at his mom. She nodded and let him go back to his coloring book. One woman, older, paused by Sam's table on her way out. She didn't say anything. She just reached out briefly, rested a hand on his shoulder, and kept walking. Maddox stayed put until Sam's plate was clean. He hadn't sat down, hadn't moved, just stood there. When Sam finally set his fork down and wiped his hands on the napkin, Maddox leaned slightly forward, voice low enough that only Sam could hear. "Staff Sergeant Thomas was in my unit last deployment," he said. "He still talks about you. Says the training manual should just be a picture of you with the caption, 'Do it like this.'" Sam didn't smile. Not really. But the corner of his mouth twitched like maybe he remembered something funny. "Thomas," he muttered. "Good Marine, terrible poker player." "Still is," Maddox replied, voice barely audible. Sam reached for his cane. Maddox didn't offer help, just took a small step back, enough room for Sam to rise on his own. As he stood, something subtle rippled through the diner. Nothing orchestrated. Just a few people sitting straighter, looking up. No one said anything. But the room shifted. Carla approached with the check, like she always did. Hank caught her eye and shook his head. "On the house today, Sergeant," he said loud enough for the room, "and every Sunday from now on." Sam shook his head once. "I pay my way," he said. "Always have." Maddox stepped in gently. "Then consider it a standing order, Marine to civilian." There was no argument, just a pause. Then Sam nodded once. 1 week later, he came back, same time, same booth. But something had changed. Above the booth, mounted on the wall, was a small brass plaque, clean, polished, simple, reserved for Sergeant Samuel Webb, still standing. Below it, framed in oak, was the same photograph Maddox had held up. The jungle, the dirt, the young man carrying a wounded Marine through smoke and green and fire. Hank must have gotten a copy. Someone must have made it happen fast. As Sam made his way to the booth, he noticed them before he sat, the same group of guys from last week. Not laughing this time, not talking, just sitting near the counter, quieter than before. When they saw him, they stood. Not in mockery, not in protest, just because it felt like the right thing to do. The one who'd made the cosplay joke stepped forward. "Sergeant Webb," he said, "we came back to apologize properly. What we did was unforgivable." Sam studied them. Fishing shirts, ball caps, beer guts. They looked smaller this time, younger somehow, like kids caught in the wrong game. "You already apologized," he said. "Not properly," the man replied. "My father served in Desert Storm. He'd be ashamed of what I did." Sam nodded, then said something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't dismissal either. Next time, he said, sit with me before you laugh behind me. You might learn something worth knowing. The men stood there for a moment. Then one nodded, then another. Then they sat, not at Sam's booth, not yet, but near enough, close enough. And when the door opened again and Colonel Maddox walked in, dressed in civilian clothes but carrying himself exactly the same, Sam looked up, caught his eye, gestured once to the empty seat across from him. Maddox didn't hesitate, just nodded and walked over. The booth wasn't just a booth anymore, and Sunday wasn't just Sunday. Marissa hadn't planned on wearing anything different that morning. She woke up, same time, poured her coffee, same brand, same mug. But when she reached for her apron, she hesitated. Hanging next to it, pinned neatly to the fabric, was a small Marine Corps emblem, gifted to her the week before by Sam Webb. No speech, no story. He just handed it over with a nod and walked to his booth. Now, it felt like a responsibility. She pinned it on before leaving the house. The diner opened to a slow crowd. A couple of early risers, a delivery guy getting coffee to go, one of the teachers from the middle school marking papers over pancakes. And then, on time as always, Sam walked in. His pace hadn't changed. Neither had his expression. But something in the room did. Heads turned when they heard the cane. Not out of pity, not out of habit, but because the booth by the window had changed. Because the brass plaque now gleamed under the early light. Because they'd seen what that moment had meant. The photo framed under the plaque had already drawn attention. Customers had paused to look closer, some recognizing the jungle setting, some just staring at the young man's face. A few had asked Hank if it was really Sam. Hank hadn't answered. He just told them to ask him themselves. This time, Sam's booth wasn't empty. Colonel Maddox sat across from him. No uniform today. Just a pressed shirt, dark jeans, boots that looked like they still carried weight. He didn't talk much. Neither did Sam. They sipped their coffee, read their menus even though they both knew what they'd order. Two men who'd seen enough of each other's world to let silence be the conversation. Carla brought their coffee, gave a small nod toward the plaque, and topped both cups. They said nothing. Both replied the same way, a short glance, a barely there smile. The kind of exchange you get when language doesn't quite cover the ground you've walked. The men from the previous Sunday sat in the same spot, just near enough to be seen, just far enough not to intrude. They weren't talking loudly. One of them was watching Sam. Another nodded when Maddox looked over. The rest kept their heads down, stirring cream into coffee, glancing at the brass plate like it meant something more than reserved seating. And maybe now it did. Sam didn't invite them over, not this time, but he saw them, and they knew it. As breakfast moved on, more regulars trickled in. A retired school principal, a local mechanic, a woman who'd lost her husband 2 winters ago and came every Sunday to sit by the jukebox even though she never played anything. They all gave Sam a nod, some quiet, some barely noticeable, but they were there. And from that morning forward, something began to shift. Veterans started showing up. One Sunday, it was a guy in his 50s wearing a faded Navy hat. The next, a man with an Army airborne tattoo and a limp even slower than Sam's. They came alone at first, sat at the counter, ordered coffee, sometimes stayed, sometimes left. Then the Sundays started to fill. Not all with vets. Some were just people who'd seen the post online. Someone had taken a photo of the plaque, the booth, the colonel at attention, and put it on social media with a caption that simply read, "Still standing." The post had gone viral by Tuesday. By the following week, people were coming just to sit in the same room. Not to talk, just to be there, just to witness. And Sam? He never changed his routine. He still ordered the same thing, still showed up at 9:15, still nodded once when Carla brought his coffee. But now, he didn't always sit alone. Some mornings it was Maddox. Some mornings it was one of the old-timers who'd known Sam from back when he still coached Little League. One Sunday, a teenage boy asked if he could sit and talk about joining the military. Sam said yes. They sat for 20 minutes. The boy left with nothing in his hands, but something heavier in his mind. Marissa started noticing something too. The tone of the diner had shifted. The laughter was still there. This was still a place for pancakes and bacon and grease-stained napkins. But now there was an undercurrent of something else. People tipped better. They looked each other in the eye more. The booth had become a kind of quiet pulse, Not sacred, not holy, just known. A place where something had happened, and now it couldn't be unseen. One Sunday, a man showed up in a brand new uniform, straight from boot camp. He saluted Sam before sitting. Sam didn't salute back. He just nodded, motioned for the kid to sit down. The kid looked like he might cry. Instead, he ordered coffee. By mid-month, Hank had started calling it Webb's Hour. Not officially, just something he wrote on the schedule to block out the booth from anyone else. Every Sunday, that table was occupied. Not by reservation, by recognition. And through it all, Sam kept coming, kept sitting, kept standing in his own way. The tradition grew like anything real does, quietly, without a plan. No flyers, no announcements, just one Sunday after another, marked not by headlines but by who showed up. By week 4, people weren't just stopping by, they were waiting. The plaque above the booth had become something of a landmark. Customers asked to take photos beside it. One woman brought her teenage son to read the inscription. Another left a small envelope beneath the frame. No name, no note, just a purple heart pin wrapped in tissue paper. Sam never asked for any of it. He didn't react to most of it. But he showed up every week, 9:15 sharp. Booth cleaned, plaque polished. The fork that once dropped now rested on the table before he arrived, polished and placed by Carla. It was Maddox who noticed first. One Sunday morning, after their usual exchange of nods and black coffee, he caught Sam glancing at the brass plaque longer than usual. Not staring, not pausing, just longer. The kind of look someone gives a photo of a friend they haven't seen in a long time. That day, Sam didn't say much. Finished his toast, tipped his mug slightly to signal he was done. Maddox walked him to the door. Sam didn't protest. He didn't say goodbye either. He just left. The next week, when he walked in, something was different. He reached his booth and stopped. A man already stood beside it. You could tell by the uniform, marine dress blues, newly pressed. Not a wrinkle. The man was young, maybe late 20s, clean cut, alert, but not the wide-eyed kind. He'd been places, not Sam's kind of places, but close. He stepped forward. "Sergeant Webb," he said, "mind if I sit with you today?" Sam looked at the man, then at the seat, then nodded. The young Marine introduced himself as Private First Class Daniel Ridge. He'd driven up from 3 towns over after hearing about the booth. Without someone had sent him a screenshot of the photo, Sam carrying Maddox through the jungle. He said he'd looked at that picture every day of his final month at boot, said it got him through the worst nights. Sam didn't know what to say to that. So he didn't. He just waved Carla over. She brought 2 coffees. Black. No sugar. They didn't talk much, just sat. And then Ridge reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was creased, clearly handled too many times. He slid it across the table. On it was a handwritten note. Nothing formal, just a line from his grandfather. "Real men don't raise their voices. They just stand where others won't." Sam read it once, then folded it again and slid it back. The booth was quiet that day. Not because people weren't talking, but because no one around them wanted to interrupt. Even the kids seemed to understand something serious was happening. That week, Carla found a stack of thank you notes left in a neat pile at the register. Dozens of them. Some typed, some handwritten, some scrawled on napkins, all addressed to the man at the booth. She gave them to Sam the following Sunday. He didn't read them there. He took them home. Maddox stopped by later that afternoon, found Sam sitting on the back porch with the stack unopened beside him. They didn't speak much, just sat. Eventually, Sam reached into the stack, pulled one out, read it. It was from a high school senior. She wrote about her father, who served in Iraq, and how he never talked about it. But when he saw the photo of Sam, he got quiet for a full hour, then told her stories she'd never heard. Sam didn't say anything, but he kept reading. Week by week, more letters came. One from a man in Colorado who'd lost both legs to an IED and said the image of Sam with Maddox reminded him of why he kept pushing through therapy. One from a former nurse who said she'd served in field hospitals and thought she'd forgotten all the names until she saw the face in that photo and remembered one. Corporal Maddox, shrapnel wound, high fever, scared out of his mind. She said Sam's face brought it back like a light switching on. The stories piled up, the silence between them deepened. But it wasn't a heavy silence. It was the kind that made room for truth. Sam never said he understood, never offered speeches, never told stories of his own. He didn't need to. The booth spoke louder than words. Carla started keeping a logbook beneath the counter. People asked to sign it. Some wrote their names, others just left initials. One man wrote down his father's dog tag's number and nothing else. By the seventh Sunday, the booth never sat empty. Even when Sam didn't bring someone himself, someone new asked to sit. Not all veterans. Some just people who wanted to be near it. There was no rule about it. But if you came to the booth, you came with respect. And if you didn't have it, you didn't sit. That was understood. Unspoken, but clear. One day, Sam sat with a boy no older than 16. The kid wore a junior ROTC shirt and nervously held a small notebook. He asked about service, about sacrifice, about what to expect. Sam listened. Then, without preamble, he said, "You want to learn something worth knowing?" The boy nodded. Sam pointed to the booth. Sit here next Sunday. Listen, don't talk, just watch." The boy came back, and he did, and the booth kept standing. It was mid-fall when the first break in routine happened. Sam didn't come in that Sunday. No call, no message, no note left behind. The plaque still gleamed, the photo still hung, the coffee still brewed at 9:15. But the booth stayed empty. Carla waited. Hank waited. Maddox arrived 10 minutes later than usual, looked once at the door, then sat down 2 booths away. No words, just black coffee and silence. People noticed. They didn't ask, but the energy shifted, like a missing chord in a song everyone knew. On Monday morning, a letter arrived at the diner. Handwritten, neat cursive, the kind you don't see anymore. It was from Sam. Delivered by a neighbor. Short, direct. Won't be in this week? Might be a while. Knees gone stiff. VA's running tests. No drama. No drama. Sam's signature line. Maddox read it once, folded it, and handed it to Hank without comment. The plaque stayed up. The table stayed set. The photo didn't move. People still came. Maddox kept his Sunday seat. Carla poured the coffee anyway, and then, 3 weeks later, Sam returned. No warning, no fanfare. Just walked through the door like nothing had happened. The knee brace was visible, the cane newer, but everything else was the same. 9:15, booth by the window. Carla had the coffee ready. Maddox nodded before Sam sat down. The place didn't erupt. No applause. No standing ovation. Just the sound of coffee cups hitting saucers and forks scraping plates. But there was a weight in the air. A gravity that came from seeing something return that people weren't sure would come back. After that, Sam showed up every other Sunday. The walks took longer. The cane stayed. Maddox sometimes offered a shoulder on the way out, not to steady, just to pace. Then, one Sunday in December, Sam handed Carla a folded paper before sitting. "Put this up when I'm not here," he said. She nodded without opening it. That week, when the booth was empty again, Carla tacked the folded sign to the edge of the table. It read, "Still standing, just not here today." Underneath, Sam had drawn a small emblem, a crude but recognizable outline of a Marine Corps badge. It stayed up for the next 3 absences. And then came spring. The booth never sat empty. Maddox came every week, sometimes Ridge, sometimes a new face. The teenage boy with the notebook returned regularly, now in full ROTC uniform, shoes shining so hard they looked glassy. Once, a group of bikers came in, all vets, leather patched with unit insignias and tour dates. They didn't speak much, just nodded toward the plaque, took seats nearby, left a 20 on the table they never ordered from. The logbook behind the counter had filled 2 volumes. Names, stories, fragments of lives stitched together by a shared understanding. And then, one Sunday morning, something happened no one expected. A young woman came in, early 20s, hair tucked under a baseball cap. She walked to the counter, ordered a coffee, and stood staring at the plaque for a long time. Carla watched, gave her space. Finally, the girl turned. "Was his name Samuel Webb?" she asked. "Yes," Carla said. "He was my grandfather." The words didn't land like thunder. They didn't echo across the room. They just dropped, soft, firm, undeniable. Maddox stood up, walked over, looked at her once. "I served with him," he said, "long time ago." She nodded, eyes scanning the photo. "I never met him. He and my mom weren't close, but I saw the post, the story. I just wanted to see it for myself." Carla invited her to sit. The booth was open that week. The girl didn't hesitate. She slid into the bench seat slowly, like trying on a memory that didn't belong to her, but somehow still fit. Maddox sat across from her. Carla brought coffee. No one said much, but when she left, she asked for a copy of the photo. Hank handed her one without asking. Outside, before stepping into her car, she stood for a long time looking at the window. the same window her grandfather had faced every Sunday morning. That spring, Hank had a new plaque made. They mounted it beside the original. It read, "For those who stood beside him and those who now stand in his place." The booth didn't become a monument. It stayed a table. Coffee got spilled. Toast got burned. People laughed. Some cried. But the space remained exactly what it had always been. Real. Not a story. Not a myth. A place. One Sunday, Maddox walked in late. The booth was already occupied. The teenage boy with the notebook sat across from an older man with a prosthetic arm and a scar running along his jawline. They were talking. Maddox didn't interrupt. He found a seat near the door, opened a paper, ordered coffee. Carla brought it without asking. The logbook now sat on the front counter, open to the last page. A child had written in shaky crayon, "My dad told me heroes are quiet. I think they eat eggs." That was enough, because sometimes you don't need parades or speeches or statues. Sometimes all it takes is a booth, a photo, and a man who never stopped showing up, still standing, even when he's not there. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's story. We truly appreciate your presence here. The story we shared wasn't just about one man or one moment. It was about the quiet strength that still exists in a world full of noise. It's about the power of standing up, even when no one is watching, and showing respect when it's not required, but deeply deserved. If today's message resonated with you, supporting our channel is simple. Just click the like button. It helps more than you think. Leave a comment below and let us know which country you're watching from and how this story made you feel. We read every single message, and it means the world to hear from you. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. That way, you'll never miss a chance to hear stories like this. Real, honest, and worth remembering. Thanks again for being here. We're honored to have you.